The Supreme Court just said it's going to hear a case later in early 2025 that has to do with whether religious nonprofits have to pay unemployment taxes. And I realize that sounds extremely boring, but the story behind how this case got to the Supreme Court's kind of wild. And I think it's worth talking about this because the consequences here could be enormous depending on what the Supreme Court does. Okay, so here's what happened. Earlier this year, the Wisconsin Supreme Court, and if you know anything about the Wisconsin Supreme Court, is that recently, like last year, 2 years ago, it is a 4-3 liberal majority. Like there was a big Supreme Court election. A woman was running for that seat. She had the support of progressives. She won. It flipped the Wisconsin Supreme Court. They got rid of gerrymandering in the state. Well, this 4-3 liberal Supreme Court in Wisconsin, they ruled on an issue earlier this year. It was a 4-3 vote. And let me tell you about that case. It involved something called the Wisconsin Unemployment Compensation Act. And what that is it says all employers in the state of Wisconsin have to give money to the government to help pay eligible citizens temporary benefits when they're out of work. Like basically all employers have to chip into the unemployment tax system to help people who are out of work. Now in 1972, religious nonprofits were declared exempt from that law. Specifically, the law said that if you're a nonprofit, even if you employ people, but you're a church or a ministry and you operate primarily for religious purposes, you do not have to pay into the system. I'm not saying I like that law, but that is what they passed in 1972. So last year, a lower court in Wisconsin said a group called the Catholic Charities Bureau, along with 4 of its groups that it's oversees, the Catholic Charities Bureau, it said, is not eligible for the exemption. And like everyone knew that the Catholic Charities Bureau, the CCB, it is overseen by a Catholic diocese. But the question that everyone was wondering is the charity work that they do, is it actually religious in nature? Are they promoting their religion with the work they do? I'll give you an example. Some of these groups that were working under the CCB, the Catholic group, they helped people with job placement. They helped give food to the hungry. They helped people with developmental disabilities. And all of those things are really important. I'm so glad there are groups doing that sort of work. And the CCB said, our desire to help poor people and disadvantaged people, that is just an extension of our faith. That's fine. That's great. Like, I wish more religious people were like that. You know what I mean? But here's the question. If you are helping the poor and you're helping people who are disadvantaged, is that religious? Because all the services they were providing were secular in nature. And just because like the top of their organizational chart has the Catholic Church at the top, doesn't mean they are working to advance Catholicism. And if they're not actively and directly promoting Catholicism, why should they get a tax exemption that's supposed to benefit religious organizations? You know what I mean? So for decades, the CCB was right along with us on this. They paid the unemployment taxes because they said our work is charitable, educational, and rehabilitative. It's not religious. They're the ones that said that. But in 2015, for whatever reason, they said, hey, we're going to apply for that tax exemption. We're religious now. We're going to go for it. Maybe, the Catholic Church has shifted to the right in many ways. They decided to go for it. And guess what? They got rejected because the courts basically said, you're not promoting religion. You're helping the poor. That's great. But you're not promoting religion. You don't get a tax exemption. So over the next several years, that decision got reversed. Then it got reversed again. This happened over and over in the courts. And so finally, this case gets in front of the Wisconsin Supreme Court. And when they looked at this case, they arrived at the same conclusion. And I want to show you what they said. This is from their ruling right here. The Court of Appeals concluded that for an employee's services to be exempt from unemployment tax, the organization must not only have a religious motivation, but the services provided, its activities, must also be primarily religious in nature. That's what the law says. You are not promoting religion, so you don't get the exemption. That's what the Wisconsin Supreme Court said. They said you can't just look at the top of the pyramid and see the Catholic Church. You can't just say you're religious when the work you're doing is not. We have to look at your activities, not your reasons for why you do this stuff, but what you are actually doing. So, in other words, we don't care if you call yourself Catholic, because literally any organization can just say, oh, yeah, we're totally Catholic. And then they could get out of paying the taxes. And like, that would be horrible. Like, what mattered is what you do. And when the justices looked at that, they said the tax exemptions were never meant for groups like yours. Okay. Look at what they wrote in the ruling here again. The record demonstrates that CCB and the sub-entities, which are organized as separate corporations apart from the church itself, neither attempt to imbue program participants with the Catholic faith, nor supply any religious materials to program participants or employees. Although not required, those would be strong indications that the activities are primarily religious in nature. Like if you were proselytizing while you are helping people get food or find jobs, okay, that's promoting religion, but you don't do that. So you're not promoting religion. So why do you get a tax exemption? That doesn't make any sense. They went on to say, this is a separate part of the same ruling, CCBs and the sub-entities' activities are primarily charitable and secular. They said that. It is secular work that you are doing. They went on to say here, look at this, a wholly secular endeavor. I don't know if that's a pun, holy, but well played if it is. They also said, look at this, such services can be provided by organizations of either religious or secular motivations. Anyone could do the work you're doing, and the services provided would not differ in any sense. So how come you want a tax exemption when a secular group doing the same thing you do would not get one? That doesn't make any sense, which is true. They said one other thing in this decision. This is number 67. Although CCB and the sub-entities assert a religious motivation behind their work, the law's language indicates that's not enough to get the exemption. An objective examination of the actual activities of CCB and your sub-entities reveals that their activities are secular in nature. We therefore conclude that CCB and the sub-entities are not operated primarily for religious purposes, so you don't get your tax exemption. So, huge decision. The correct decision. And like, look, there might have been a different outcome if the Catholic Church was literally running these groups, but that's not what happened. The church is just overseeing it from a distance at arm's length. So from here on out, at least in Wisconsin, charities have to do a lot more than just point to a cross somewhere to prove they deserve a faith-based exemption under the law. They have to say, look, we are a religious organization. Here's what we do to promote religion. And that's why we deserve out of paying in these unemployment taxes. I mean, it was a big ruling when it happened, in part because it kind of feels courageous these days for any powerful court to state the obvious. Like, just because an organization cites a religious link doesn't make it religious. That's a far cry from the US Supreme Court, which says Hobby Lobby is Christian and it doesn't have to provide, comprehensive health insurance for its employees because its owners like Jesus, right? So like, this was a big deal in Wisconsin. What would have happened if they ruled the other way? That could have been bad. And in fact, when a reporter asked the Freedom from Religion Foundation about this, look at what they said. This is from Patrick Elliott, who's an attorney with FFRF. If the charity groups had prevailed, the next steps would be arguments to exempt religious hospitals and religious colleges, such as Marquette University, from paying the unemployment tax. Like Marquette University, a religious school, has to pay these taxes because providing an education is not a religious endeavor. Like you're a religious faith-based school, but you're not there to promote religion. But you can imagine if the Supreme Court said the other thing, every one of these religious colleges, religious hospitals would say, we don't want to pay the tax either. The whole system would break down. And Elliot said, it's really a win for employees who work for religious organizations because now they get coverage under the Wisconsin unemployment system. Yes, it's a win-win for everybody involved. Like more companies paying more taxes, assuming they're going to good places, like that's good for everybody, right? And by the way, I want to show you one other thing. If you need more proof that the Wisconsin Supreme Court made the right decision here, let me show you the first page of the dissent in that ruling. Here you go. This is the dissenting opinion. It begins with the Bible verse. The state of Wisconsin gives a tax exemption to any nonprofit organization operated primarily for religious purposes and operated by a church. Like, if you're starting your dissent saying these are religious organizations and we respect church-state separation in this state, and you're beginning it with a Bible verse, like maybe you're not helping your cause. That same dissenting judge said one paragraph later that the liberal majority is impermissibly entangling the government in church doctrine after citing a Bible verse in her dissent. Crazy. So whatever. So the religious groups that defended the CCB, they were mad and they said, we're totally going to fight you on this all the way up. Where did this go? I want to make sure I could pull this up here. Here we go. The right-wing group Beckett Fund, this is what they told a news outlet. The Wisconsin Supreme Court got this case dead wrong. CCB is religious, whether Wisconsin recognizes that fact or not. Which, just think about that for a second. No one said the CCB isn't religious. What the Supreme Court in Wisconsin justices said is, yeah, fine, but the work they're doing is not promoting religion. I don't know why the lawyer doesn't get that, but I do. Whatever. The firm will appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court because, of course, if they can get this in front of Clarence Thomas and Sam Alito, they're feeling pretty good about their chances. It is telling that the way they responded to that case didn't mention any of the facts of the case. But I think a ruling like this in Wisconsin was long overdue because we know there are mega church pastors who don't pay taxes on their mansions because they can just say the homes are owned by their ministries. And they should pay taxes on it because that's not for religious purposes. They found a way to get out of the system, and that's not right. And in Wisconsin, they were not allowed to get out of the system, and that's a good thing. Religious ministries should not be able to get tax exemptions on anything they want, even when they're not promoting religion. Of course, they shouldn't get those exemptions. Serving the poor and helping the needy are not inherently religious just because some people want to pretend they are. So at the end of the day, I want to be clear with the Wisconsin Supreme Court ruling, none of this prevented the Catholic Church from doing a damn thing. If they want to help the needy, they can do it. If they want to feed the poor, feed the hungry, help the poor, help them get jobs, if they believe their faith calls for them to do that, great. Nobody is stopping you. And in fact, by paying those unemployment taxes, by paying into the system, they're actually doing even more good because they are now also helping people dealing with unemployment. Like, it's all good all the way around here. So by appealing this to the Supreme Court, the Catholic Church and this conservative Beckett Fund group, they were basically saying, yeah, but part of our religion is also screwing over the unemployed. We don't like them. We don't want them to get access to money. We don't want to pay into the system. Whatever goodwill they may have preserved by focusing on helping the less fortunate would have been wiped out because they're basically saying, screw the poor, screw the people who don't have jobs right now. Not our job to help them. And I bring this all up because guess what happened last Friday? The U.S. Supreme Court said, hey, we're going to listen to 2 new cases next year. And one of them is Catholic Charities Bureau versus the Wisconsin Labor Review Commission. They are going to hear this case. So that's bad news. The Supreme Court gets to choose which cases it takes up, and the fact that 4 justices agreed we want to hear this one suggests to me that they want to overturn what the Wisconsin court did. I have to assume that's what they're going to do. And again, if they do that, it is possible that faith-based colleges and hospitals across the country could receive a financial windfall because they no longer have to pay unemployment taxes, at least in states where they're not exempt. I don't know what the court could do here. It's possible they could say, we're just overturning the Wisconsin ruling, so this only applies to Catholic Charities Bureau, or it only applies to religious institutions in Wisconsin, or they could just try to blow a massive hole in the wall between church and state and say, nope, no religious entity has to pay any sort of taxes. I don't know. Like, I'm not a lawyer. Don't ask me what they're going to do. But every time the U.S. Supreme Court gets a chance to destroy church-state separation, they have taken that opportunity. And they keep getting bigger. And that is disturbing. Speaking to CNN, one legal expert put it this way that I wanted to show you. Here we go. This is from Steve Vladeck, who is a Supreme Court expert. Here we go. The fact that the court is agreeing to hear this case at all is perhaps a sign that the court wants to weigh in more generally on the scope of such state law exemptions and how they are applied across the country. Either way, this quickly becomes the most significant religious liberty case to receive full review from the court in the last 2 years. Yeah, it is scary, scary stuff. You can imagine how many charities are going to race to align with a religious group, regardless of what they actually do, for no reason other than we don't want to pay taxes, and Clarence Thomas is about to give us a green light. I will tell you, Wisconsin's Attorney General, his name is Joshua Call, he's a Democrat. This is what he said to the Supreme Court when he was asking them, don't take up this case. He said, Wisconsin Supreme Court got it right. Courts routinely deny religious tax exemptions to entities that assert religious motivations without overly entangling themselves in religious matters. That effort doesn't violate the church autonomy principle. Basically, courts say yes or no to churches and taxes all the time, or courts make religious groups pay taxes all the time. It doesn't get involved in church doctrine. It doesn't tell the churches what to do. It doesn't make them do anything. And the unemployment tax doesn't violate their argument that this gets in the way of their free exercise rights. It imposes no constitutionally significant burden on the religious work they do. It is a general law that is neutral and non-discriminatory on questions of religious belief. So, hey, Supreme Court, don't take up this case. And the Supreme Court's like, yeah, we don't care. We are totally taking up this case because we can. And now the question is going to be, how much damage will they do using this case as the vehicle? So that decision will come out probably in June of next year, and the oral arguments will happen in the next couple months. But it's disturbing, and you should keep this case in mind because we don't know how badly they are going to use it. What's the Supreme Court going to do with this case? We don't know. All right, I'm going to stop there. What other questions do you have? And then I think I'm going to call it a night. It sounds like they're trying to have it both ways, though. If they're providing a secular service, that means they're going to ask for federal funding. I don't know if CCB gets federal funding for any of this stuff. But they should have to pay whatever general taxes any organization in the state has to pay. And they get access to that too. Their employees are also eligible for those employment funds if they are in that position. So you're screwing over your employees as well as other people who are in need of help by trying to overturn the Wisconsin Supreme Court's ruling. It doesn't make sense to me. I mean, I get why they're doing it, but it shouldn't make sense. If the SCOTUS does that, who wants to bet the Satanic Church will be jumping in with adding religion to everything that should be getting taxed to get them to reverse? Well, and this is the fear. Depending on how far and how broad a ruling is, how many groups are going to claim they are affiliated with a church, including the Satanic Temple or what have you, however loose that relationship is, just to get out of paying some general tax. Like I can't, all these money-making organizations or charities that want to preserve whatever money they have in donations, why wouldn't they do that? It sounds like it would be a business decision at that point. So, yeah, it could be really bad. I'm not even worried about the Satanic Temple so much as I'm worried about hospitals and colleges that are affiliated loosely with a religion that are just saying, well, this is an easy way for us not to have to pay money, so let's not do it. Like you can't rely on religious organizations to do the right thing on their own. Like you got to force them to do it.